Hey, I'm Jen Donahue. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about mastering genuine leadership and your power to do great things. So, one of the most interesting things that's happening right now in our society is that people are quitting in droves. And so, I want you to think about what's going on today in the United States. How many people on this presentation know of somebody who's quit in, say, the last 6 months? Now, what's interesting is that most employers think that people are quitting because they want more money. And statistics show that they think about, 80% want to go get more money at another corporation, when in actuality, it's quite the opposite. Really, only about 20% of people who are quitting their job right now are looking for more money. So, my question to you is, what are the 80% doing? And so, why do you think that they're quitting? And the answer is pretty simple. They're looking for the hope. They're looking for the hope that there is something better out there. They're looking for more autonomy. They're looking for independence. They're looking for better managers. That's really saying quite a lot. One of my best friends, she recently quit her job. She worked for a very established company. She had a great 401k. And it got to the point where just her management was just so terrible that she decided, you know what? I need to find something different. And she is so happy right now. But really, what does that say for us? If people are quitting and going to look for the hope of something better and to be better managed, where does that leave us? Now, the graph that I have right here, this is the quit rate. So this is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is the last couple of years. You can see on average that people are quitting. This is across all industries. People are quitting somewhere in the 2 to 2.5% every single month. Now, everybody knows that in 2020, we had quite a different year. And you see this, just dive in the quit rates. People were scared. They didn't want to quit their job because everybody, they were looking around and saying, oh my gosh, I might not have a job. I'm going to stay in my job as long as I can. But what's interesting is that towards the end of the year, that completely changed. You'll notice here that for 2020, especially at the end of the year, the quit rate was higher than it's been in the last several years. People were tired. They realized what they had and that they wanted more. But what's even more astounding is take a look at 2021. Now, the labor statistics haven't caught up for the last couple of months, but look at April. Look at how many people quit their jobs in April. Now, why is that? Some may say that it's because they were just tired of being cooped up in their house and they wanted to go someplace different. But if you really start to dig into it, they realize that they were not being properly managed during COVID-19 and they wanted out. They wanted something different. So what does this really mean for us? 143%. And you're probably asking, what exactly is that? 143% is the retention rate for companies that are open and effective in their management. So people aren't quitting these companies. They're actually growing and they're retaining their people. Because what happens is that when somebody quits, think of the huge hole that that leaves in your project or in your team. $5,000 is the minimum amount that it's going to take to bring somebody back on. You're going to have a huge hole in your organization. You're going to have to go out and try to hire somebody new. You're going to have to onboard them. You're going to have to train them. So 5,000 is the minimum. But think of the time scale that we're also looking at. Say it's 6 months. Can your current team manage one person down, maybe 2 or 3 people down? We want to retain our people, and we have to do that by managing them better. So again, 143%, that's what we're striving for. We want to grow our companies. Now, you're probably wondering, what exactly is this? And yes, it actually is Greek. But what it means is to know thyself. Now, this was the Delphic maxim that was put on the Apollo temple in 1400 BC. And what this tells me is that those old guys, they really knew what they were talking about. This is the first time that we've seen know thyself. You have to know who you are first in order to be a better leader. But really, how do we get there? I know that it probably can be a complete quagmire if you're looking at, all the different ways that you can look to be a better leader. But over my last 26 years in the US military and starting my own business, I really developed a roadmap. And we're going to go through 3 different checkpoints as we go. We're going to talk about knowing yourself. We're going to talk about knowing your team. And we're also going to talk about building that trust in your team so that we make sure that we retain them and that they don't go looking for the hope of something better. So let's start on our road. So the first one is to know thyself. Going back to Apollo's temple in 1400 BC, we want to make sure that we know ourselves. Now, it sounds pretty easy, but I want you to go on a little journey with me. Think of the leader that you most want to emulate. I'm not asking you who is a great leader, but I want to ask you, who is the leader that you most want to be like? Do you have that person in your head? Now I want you to think of 3 traits that really set that person apart. Why do you want to be like that person? Now here's a list that we can go through, and maybe some of these characteristics are something that really embodies that person. Now, I've been doing this research for about the past 3 years, and I've been accumulating all of these different traits. And this is what it looks like. So you can see here, these are the traits that people are most looking for in a leader. Leads by example, empathetic, inspiring. What I find interesting on this is that the ones that you would think that would be on there aren't really on there at all. Everybody thinks in order to be a great leader, you have to be big and bold and fearless. But if you look at this, where's big, bold, and fearless? They're pretty small. People aren't really looking to follow those types of leaders. And so I want you to think about your own personality and your own traits and your own strengths that you have. Do they show up on this word cloud? Are you empathetic? Do you have integrity? Are you decisive? Because what this means is that probably the traits that you already have are the ones that others are looking for in a great leader. You don't have to go and be a big, bold, fearless leader in order to go do a good job. You have to look at your own traits and your own strengths, because those are the ones that people are really looking for to be led by. So I call this the 3 B's. Knowing yourself. Number 1, you have to be self-aware. And one of the best ways to do this is to take a personality test. And I know that sounds probably pretty silly, and I was a huge skeptic whenever I started doing this. But I took the Clifton Strengths, I took the Myers-Briggs, and I thought there is no way that test that I'm just writing down my answers on is going to tell me anything about me. I was so wrong. It nailed it. I was so shocked. I was reading through and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. I do that when I'm stressed out. Yeah, that's what I do. And it really helped me go through and understand the traits that were my strengths and also the traits that I really needed to start to work on a little bit better. Now, I'm not talking about going on Facebook and there's the test about if you're a potato, what kind of potato are you going to be? Not that kind of personality test. Really invest the time in taking some of these personality tests and understanding what your strengths and your weaknesses are. Now, the second one is be proficient. And what I mean by this is that you need to start reading and start learning every single day. Be professional. Look at professional organizations, look at personal growth. Because as a leader, one of the things that you want to do is you don't necessarily have to be the smartest person in the room, but you need to be able to lead those and understand what they're working on. So if you have teammates and maybe they're very skilled and very technical, learn more about what they're doing so that you can ask the hard questions when it comes to that point. The last one is be yourself. Now, I have a terrible story of an epic failure of me trying to lead people. I was a junior officer and I had never led people in my entire life. And I was in charge of 15 people in a naval construction battalion. So I was the junior officer and I had these enlisted people. And I'd never led anybody. And so I was like, what do I do? And so I looked to some of my senior leaders and they were all yellers. And I thought, well, I guess that's how you lead people is you yell at them. And if you yell at them, then they'll do what you're supposed to do, right? So I did that. And so every time I had this stack of papers, I would always take it into my boss and he would just take his red pen and he would just like write all over. And it was like a bloody massacre every single time that I got anything back from him. And he would just demean me and degrade me and tell me like, it had to be better. It had to be better. This is awful. Like, I can't believe you even gave this to me. So after a couple times of this, I thought, oh, well, I guess this is how you lead. So I turned around into my department and I yelled at them and I told them that they were worthless and that they need to do better. And I'm so ashamed. Because that's not the kind of person I am. And I don't want to lead that way. It's so funny. That was like 26 years ago and it still affects me. So sorry about that. Okay, but getting back to it is like, you have to be yourself. And I realized that that wasn't me. And you know what? My team, they saw right through that. They're like, you know what? That's not who she is. But it took to getting to that point to realize it's like, I need to be myself as a leader. So again, think about your own personality and who you are and how you're projecting that on people. You have to be yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be absolutely uncomfortable and you're going to regret the way that you treat people. Okay, so moving on. All right, so we talked about knowing ourselves. Now we want to make sure that we get to know our team. So how do we get there? I want to tell you the story of Rudy Bonaparte. So he was the president and CEO of a company that I used to work for. 800 people. Now, Rudy is sort of like the rock star of geotechnical engineers, if anybody knows what that is. He has written more papers and he was like, he was one of the original gods of geotechnical engineering. And he's the president of the company. Well, one day when I'm new at the company, I'm sitting down and, I'm typing and I'm doing my engineering analysis and Rudy comes in my office and I'm like, oh my God, it's Rudy. Like Rudy is coming in to like say hi. I'm kind of a fangirl. And he's like, hey, hey, Jen, it's nice to meet you. I understand you also went to UC Berkeley. That was my alma mater. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he knows where I went to school. And we start to talk and he asked me who my husband is and what project I'm working on. And he's really interested. And I was like, wow, that was great. And he's like, hey, great talking to you. Got to go see another couple people. And so he left. And so I was working in the Oakland office and Rudy's out of the Atlanta office. Well, about 6 months go by and Rudy comes back to the office and he comes in my office and I'm like, oh, Rudy's here. And he sits down. He's like, hey, Jen, how's it going? And I said, it's going really well. And he's like, hey, did you and your husband, Sean, go on that vacation you were talking about? I was like, oh, well, number one, he remembered my husband's name. And two, he remembered that I went on vacation. I don't even remember the vacation. I was like, wow, yeah, thanks, Rudy. It was great. Thank you. Hey, how's that project? Hey, you need to write a journal paper on that. We need to make sure that you get this work out there. This is really important work. I was like, oh my gosh. Yes, I'll make sure that I get this published. He's like, okay, I gotta go say hi to a couple more people. And I was like, oh my gosh, Rudy, like out of 800 people, he remembers all this. And so I went to the break room and I was talking to one of my colleagues and I said, you would not believe this. Rudy just came into my office. He remembered my name. He knew my husband's name and he remembered all this stuff. And my colleague just kind of looks and says, yep. It's like, he has a trick. And I was like, what is it? He's like, he has a stack of note cards and they say Oakland on them. He has a rubber band around it. And whenever he flies out from Atlanta to Oakland, he sits there on the plane and he reads through all of the different note cards so that he can remember who he talked to in that office. I was like absolutely blown away. And so I asked Rudy about this a couple months later, and this is what he said. I'll give you a chance to read through it. Now, isn't this the type of leader that we really want to know and to be led by? Somebody who takes so much care, that treats the whole corporation like a family, and he wants to get to know everybody. He told me that it wasn't a gimmick. He didn't want to think of it as a gimmick for those note cards. What he really wanted to do is make sure that he remembered. He's like, I was afraid that I wasn't going to remember. Now, there's different ways that we can get to know our teams as well. Maybe it is note cards, or think about what you can put on a notepad, or maybe on your phone to get to know your different teammates. And so here's my 4 tips for really getting to know your team. You need to know not just their names, but also their strengths and their weaknesses. Now, strengths are great because now we know who to put on a project, but weaknesses are a little bit different. Maybe you have somebody who's really good technically and is terrible at writing reports. That would be me. But I want to get better at writing reports. So as a leader, do you give a chance to those people who have a weakness to try to pull them and bake them into strengths? So just because somebody is really terrible at report writing, don't always say, you know what, we're not going to ever have her write a report because she's terrible at it. Start thinking about how you can help your teammates turn their weaknesses into strengths. But here's something more important. Do you know your teammates' goals and aspirations? Are they going to be the president of the company someday? Or are they just happy where they are? Start thinking about how you can help them, give them the resources that they need in order to get to their goals and their aspirations. Now you say, you know what, I have so many teammates, I don't know if I can do all of that. So here's a motto that I'd like you to take to heart. So this is the motto of the Seabees. That's what I'm part of as in the U.S. Navy. And the difficult we can do immediately. But that impossible, it takes a little bit longer. You can do it. Just make sure that you are spending as much time with your team as possible. All right, so where are we on the road now? Now we're going to start building trust in those teams. Okay, everybody says that trust is a two-way street. But as a leader, I would argue that you need to get to the on-ramp first. You need to show trust in order to earn the trust of your team. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. So the first one, have you been in a trusting business relationship? How did that really make you feel? So here's a word cloud from some of the research that I've done as well. So you should probably feel some of these as well. Comfortable, appreciated, empowered. Think about how much trust goes, as far as your team. If you trust them, this is how they're going to feel in return. Listen to, secure. They are going to feel better about going to work every day and working for you if you're showing them that trust. So have you been in a situation where you have not been trusted? And how did that make you feel? So here's a list in a word cloud of some research that I've done, and I'm sure that you probably felt some of these as well. Undervalued, frustrated. You felt like you wanted to leave. That's the flip side of not being in a trusting relationship. So really, how do we get to trust? 3 things. These are my 3 tips for building trust. Ask questions. Ask them, what is your favorite football team? Just get to know people. Do you know their spouse? Do you know their kids' names? Do you know those goals and aspirations? If you don't, you need to start asking those questions. If you don't understand the process that they're working on, sit down with them and say, can you please explain this a little bit to me? Yes, that does take vulnerability as a leader to say, I don't know. But you need to ask those questions, because if you do, more than likely that person is so excited to tell you all about what they're doing. That's really going to start to open up that door. Next, you need to communicate, often and with transparency. As leaders, we know a lot about what's going in our corporation. We need to be sharing that. Especially in these days where we're still on Zoom and some people are in the office, we're going to need to communicate more. Now, some people need more communication than others. Others look to communication in different ways than others. Some people just like to go on the chat and that's how they communicate. Some people, you need to pick up the phone. As a leader, you need to understand the best way that you can communicate with your team. And last is listen. Actively listening. This is the hard part, especially for me. I'm one of those people who just wants to jump right in and just start talking. But as leaders, we need to make sure that we are listening to what our people have to say. If we have a great idea and we want to go run in a direction, listen to your team. Maybe they've seen this before and knew that it didn't work. Or maybe they have ways to make it even better. So listen to your team. So hopefully everybody recognizes the little green army men. And what I want to point out here is that if you notice, they're all in a circle and they're all pointing the guns out. And this is a good way to get to trust. And I'll give you an example. This is what's called a range card. And when you're in the military and you go out into a new area, a lot of times the leader will put you down in a spot and will give you your handy compass and say, these are your left and right lateral limits. And what you do is you sit down with your range card and you draw out, okay, I know that there's a road in front of me. And so you kind of measure out like there's the road and maybe there's a fence, maybe a tree and a barn. And you put that all on your range card. And then what you do is you draw your left and right lateral limits. Now, within your left and right lateral limits, you have the authority and the responsibility for everything within that sector. Now you say, well, what if somebody's coming down the road from the right? Well, there's somebody on your left who has a right lateral limit that crisscrosses yours. So they're responsible for everything within that sector. So anything that's coming down the road, they're going to be in charge of. And if they can't handle it, it's going to get to your section. And you say, well, what if somebody comes over from behind the barn on the right? Well, there's somebody on your right side also that has a left and right lateral limit that crisscross yours. And the way we do this is we set this all up and then we have overlapping coverage of the entire area. But again, you have the authority and the responsibility for everything within that sector. Now, how does this really apply to everyday work? So let's start off with our range card. Maybe some of our left and right lateral limits have to do with looking at the budget. Maybe we have a minimum budget. Maybe we have a maximum budget. Think about what those are. Maybe it's time. Maybe you're totally crunched for time and you have to get something done really quickly. Or maybe, you know what, we have a couple months in order to really go through this. That's a really good left and right lateral limit to give your teammates. Say, this is your budget, this is the time, and anything within that area, they are responsible for. Now, if they have questions, they can always come back and ask you, but they have the ability to move within that space and not have to always come back and ask questions. It's a way to not micromanage your people. And here's a really practical example. Let's take a design aspect. Let's say that you are designing a bridge and you tell somebody you are responsible for the footing of this bridge. Now, I'm going to tell you how much weight it's going to need to carry. And we're going to have to look at the different lateral limits, how much this footing is going to be able to move. You are now responsible to design that footing because I've given you the design parameters and it's all up to you. That's a lot of leeway that you're giving your personnel in order to design that footing. But now they can go through and they can look at different designs in order to still make sure that they are staying in within that left and right lateral limit for the design load and then what the lateral load is. So they can go through it. Now, let's say that whenever you get out to the site, all of a sudden we have changed conditions. We thought we were on sand and now all of a sudden we're on some kind of clay. Well, guess what? They still have the authority and the responsibility to design that footing based on those changed conditions. They still have the lateral loads. They still have the load, the vertical load that they're going to have to design too. This way, they're not having to come and run back to you all the time and say, well, we had change conditions. I'm going to have to redo this. No, give them the authority and responsibility to design within those parameters. And what you're going to find is that they are now going to own that project. They're going to be excited. It's like, hey, this is my responsibility. I can do this. It also opens up the door for more creativity. Maybe you had one way to do it, but you're going to let them kind of figure it out. And maybe they're going to come up with an even better way to make that design, to still make sure that they're within those different limits. So that's a really simple design aspect that you can put, on your personnel. It takes time in the beginning because you're going to have to think out those left and right lateral limits for each one of your team members. But what this is going to do is just going to drive that innovation. It's going to drive that independence so that they want to stick around. They now have ownership of that design. They're not going to want to go and run to another company because now they have that independence. They have the innovation that they're able to just pick up on the fly and do what they need to do. So where does that bring us on the road? Okay, we know ourselves, we know our team, we've built trust in our teams, but now we're also gathering in that independence and that innovation. This is what's going to get us to that 143% retention rate. So as we go on, I want you to think about what you're going to do tomorrow morning. Now, I've given you a lot of different tips and tricks, but I want you to think about what are your takeaways. And I'll give you 2. Number 1, get to know yourself. Go take one of those personality tests and then really sit down and reflect on what it has to tell you. Number 2, get to know your team. Start asking those questions. Start understanding what really drives them, what motivates them, because we want to make sure that we are keeping our personnel, that they're not jumping ship to go someplace else. So start there. Start writing down, how are we going to do this? Maybe you do a lunch and learn. Bring people in as, throughout the week. Hey, let's go have a cup of coffee. Let's talk. Let's understand where you want to be in 3 years. Get to know your team. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure being here with Groundbreak, and I hope to hear from you soon. If you will, please reach out to me. I love to hear people's stories as they develop trust with their teams. And if they have additional ideas, I would absolutely love to hear them. So thank you again, and hope you're doing well and go out and do great things.